This is why you should never let a stranger follow you home. Today's story is one of the most horrific and malevolent home invasion incidents of all time. It is truly the worst nightmare of a parent. And if you are a fan of the true dark and mysterious tales, make sure to like this video and subscribe, as it really helps out a beginner YouTube channel like myself. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. In 1985, during the last year of his medical degree at Yale University, William Petitt Jr. was working his usual rotational shift at a local children's hospital. And during his tenure there, he met a woman by the name of Jennifer Hawk. She was a pediatric oncology nurse who was working at the hospital, and it was a love at first sight for William. Whenever he had the opportunity or was around her, he would try to act more witty, more confident, trying to grab her attention. And one day, after pondering for weeks, William actually muscled up enough courage to ask Jennifer out on a first date. And to his surprise, she was delighted. And on their first date, William's parents were so excited for their son's first date that they actually ended up crashing at the same restaurant as they did. Now, Jennifer, being a very secured and an independent woman, was not fazed or intimidated by their presence. She actually thrived. Her sense of demeanor and how she carried herself was a pleasant surprise to the parents, and they were in absolute agreement of their relationship. One thing led to another, and William Petitt Jr. eventually proposed to Jennifer, and they got married. On October 15, 1989, they welcomed their first daughter, Haley. And 6 years later, they welcomed their second daughter, Michaela. They raised their two children in their large home in their Sorghum Mill Drive in Cheshire, Connecticut. It was a typical and a quiet, peaceful neighborhood. It was a perfect place and a perfect environment to raise their two perfect daughters. The house had a large basketball hoop and a large trampoline in the backyard. They were living the American dream. And growing up, Haley was known as a very quiet and a modest girl. She was extremely intelligent and athletic. She ran cross country and was also a member of the basketball team. She was an absolute honor roll student, and when she got a little bit older, she wanted to retrace her father's steps and become a doctor. And so she planned on going to medical school after her high school graduation. And as for her younger sister, Michaela, who was in elementary school when the incident occurred, she was also involved in a lot of sport activities like soccer, lacrosse, and basketball. She also developed a love for cooking from a young age and was always excited to cook up a new dish for her family to try. And when her father, William, came back from work, she would usually find her watching the Food Channel or cooking up a new pasta dish. Now, July 22nd of 2007 was a very uneventful day for the Petitt family. William, Jennifer, and Michaela went to church early morning, and Haley was at a friend's house celebrating their recent high school graduation. And after church, Michaela and Jennifer went to the local beach, while William went golfing with his father. So by evening time, William had returned home from his golf session with his father, and Haley had also returned home from celebrating her recent graduation. However, Michaela and Jennifer would make a stop from the beach on their way home to a local supermarket because Michaela was very eager to cook up a new pasta dish for her family to try. So they were going to stop at the supermarket to buy some ingredients. And as Michaela and Jennifer entered the supermarket and shopped for groceries, there was something that was lurking behind their back. What they didn't realize when they entered the local supermarket was that a man had been following them, a 26-year-old Joshua Komisarjevsky. When they all got home, Michaela cooked up a nice pasta dish, they enjoyed their dinner, and spent their evening hours together as they would always do on the Sunday evening. They were watching the famous TV show Army Wives, while William read his newspaper on the couch. Meanwhile, they had no idea that a strange man had followed Jennifer and Michaela home, wrote down their address, and vanished. A strange man by the name of Joshua Komisarjevsky was a convicted felon of more than 12 robbery counts, had already served 5 years in jail and was released very recently on a special parole. At around 11 p.m., Jennifer locked the front and back door, turned off all the lights, and headed upstairs with her daughters to bed. Haley walked into her room and closed the door, while Michaela and Jennifer walked into the master bedroom, where Jennifer would read a book to Michaela, and Michaela would fall asleep right beside Jennifer on their parents' bed. And by this time, William had already been fast asleep on the couch. Then between 2 to 3 a.m., in the early morning of July 23rd of 2007, William woke up in a frantic, confused state. When he tried to open his eyes, he realized that he couldn't see anything out of his eyes, and his vision was extremely foggy, and he couldn't make any details of what he was seeing. However, he still felt his body resting on the couch and the Sunday newspaper resting on his chest. He couldn't make out if this was a dream or reality. However, he could feel that something was very, very wrong. And as he was trying to get up and get a hold of his consciousness, through a thin layer of fabric, he saw a very dark figure approaching him. Then another man stood beside him, holding up what could only be explained as a baseball bat. This other man started swinging and wailing the bat at him, and as soon as the bat came hard on him, he let out an unearthly scream as he rolled off the couch and screamed in agony. And when William tried to defend himself, he realized that his arms and legs were tied with zip ties, making him completely immobile. And to make things even worse, an unidentified piece of cloth has been placed over his head, which completely blurred his vision. Several more blows to the back of his head, and he was swinging in and out of his consciousness. The intruders threatened William that if he tried to do anything, that they would annihilate his entire family. Then, the intruders walked up the stairway and entered the master bedroom where Jennifer and Michaela were sleeping. One of the intruders put his hands over Jennifer's mouth and shook her gently awake. The other followed suit with Michaela, and as one of the intruders would tie their feet, the other would tie their hands. And when they were done, they did the same thing to Haley, who was down the hall. And by this time, William could hear the muffled screams of his family from the first floor where he was bounded up. And when everybody was tied up in their respective positions, the intruders demanded money. And when they realized that a safe wasn't around, they resorted to a second plan. So the plan was they would wait until 9 a.m. until one of the local Bank of America branches opened up, and Jennifer, accompanied by one of the intruders, would be instructed to withdraw $15,000, while the remaining intruder will keep an eye on the family back at the residence, while Jennifer withdrew the money and returned home. Ultimately, the plan was executed as planned, and when 9 a.m. came, they departed from the residence in their stolen van, and Jennifer walked into the bank as calmly as she could. She stood in line patiently for her turn, and when it finally was, she walked up to the counter and demanded to withdraw $15,000. When she successfully withdrew the ransom money, she returned to her car where the intruder was waiting and drove down back to her residence. Now, while Jennifer was at the bank, she was able to notify the bank manager the current situation and how her family was being held hostage for some ransom money. And so the police were notified, and by the time that Jennifer reached home, the entire premise around her residence, the parameters of her residence, were now secured with police officers. However, what is important to be noted here is that while Jennifer and the other intruder made their trip to the bank to withdraw the ransom money, the remaining intruder, who was keeping an eye on the family back at the residence, committed a series of acts that cannot be mentioned without absolute disgust. The remaining intruder, Joshua Komisarjevsky, sexually assaulted the 11-year-old Michaela in the most vulnerable ways that you could possibly imagine. She was sexually assaulted while she was tied up in her own bedpost with a pillowcase over her face. And when the other intruder returned, they also raped Jennifer and strangled her to death. The invaders then decided to burn down the entire house to get rid of any evidence that they may leave behind. With Haley and Michaela still tied to their bedposts, the invaders doused them and the entire house with gasoline and set it on fire, leaving them to die in the burning fire. They attempted to flee the scene as soon as they could. However, upon reversing the vehicle out of the driveway and stepping on the gas too quickly to make that escape attempt, they rammed into one of the unmarked police vehicles and were very quickly apprehended. The aftermath of the investigation revealed that Haley managed to escape her bedroom, actually walked across the hallway where she collapsed. Her body was found at the top of the staircase, while Michaela's body was found in her bedroom. She was still tied to the bed and her lower body hanging off of it. William had been miraculously somehow been able to free himself out of the restraints. He exited the house and crawled to a nearby neighbor's yard where he cried for help and miraculously survived to tell the tales. Dr. William Petitt Jr. is still alive to this day, making a positive impact in the world, achieving great accolades in his career field. Both Joshua Komisarjevsky and the other intruder, Linda Hayes, confessed to the murders.